Hey, good evening. Welcome to episode 8 of Tea and Type. I'm MK England,
Hi, I'm Jamie Paxton.
and this is going to be our third installment of our Project Start to Finish series that we've got going on. So today we are going to talk creating characters, which is actually one of my favorite topics. But this week, well, as always, we have to start off with what we're drinking this week. So Jamie, what you got?
I literally drink the same thing every week. I'm drinking sport tea in a coffee mug from my favorite coffee shop, and that's the end of the story here. What about you?
So I'm really excited, actually, because I just got back from Disney, of course. Had a wonderful time at Disney and the Wizarding World of Harry Potter and all of that. And, what makes it so wonderful is that I'm an enormous geek for all of these things. And Star Wars is now a Disney property. So this is like one of my most wonderful acquisitions of my trip. So
that's fantastic. I love it.
Mug, yes, and out of my new BB-8 mug. I had a really terrible day today, so I needed Mrs. Hudson to comfort me. So Mrs. Hudson's like almond tea is what I got today.
Uh, from your
Oh, Jamie's breaking up real bad on
we
my
are
end.
talking about characters.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great.
Sorry, it's a little
Nah,
glitchy.
that's all right. Oh, yeah, we're running on, weird technology this week, guys. So right, characters, yes.
I guess, so you said it's one of your favorite topics. So let's start with the whys of that. And then I was just telling you, almost 20,000 words into a new book. So we are right in the moving from the here's your character ideas to here's who your characters actually are and what they do and how they work together. So why do you love this so much? And then how do you go about it, I guess? And yeah.
Yeah. I think it's my favorite part because, dialogue is my favorite part of writing. And I always know that a book is ready to write. I think I've said this in previous episodes, when I've got a character voice like really solid in my head.
Yeah.
So when I'm like at work and like trying to, check people out all over the library counter or whatever, and my characters are like having conversations in the back of my head that I'm like, I gotta write this down. This goes in the next chapter. That to me is like the most exciting part of writing. So I really love that. That's how I get to know my characters a lot, is through those dialogue exchanges. And I have the best time, not with plotting or even world building or anything like that, but just with getting to know the characters and having fun, like smashing them together and seeing what happens.
Well, right, because that's what fiction is, right? It's getting to know new people, and it's a little bit easier than getting to know people in real life because
True. So true.
You're in charge.
So awkward.
But I do try and think about that, like that smashing it all together. Like it's kind of what we do all the time in real life. Is like, oh, what happens if all these people end up working together, or stealing a spaceship together, or whatever it might be. And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about here, which is just that your characters are you can start with character sheets, but they have to be doing things, and you have to be thinking from the get-go, not just like pretty girl who gets into high school, blah blah blah. You have to be thinking like, I think motivations are a part of an early process of character, actually, and they're all about who we are and all the different backgrounds we come from. And so you need to start at the same time you're thinking about hair color, like what does this character notice first when they walk into a crowded room versus what is the first thing they do when they get into their bedroom after they turn on the light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the like sick part of me that loves filling out paperwork loves doing those character sheets where it's like, what is their hair color? What is their eye color? Like, what is in this pocket? I do love doing those, but it's got to go deeper than that. And I think for me, like the basic character concept that I often come up with first, with I guess how the characters are going to end up driving the plot. Your characters should be people who can act on whatever the central conflict is. They should be in a position to drive that conflict in some way and be at the center of all of the change that's going on in your story. And so, like, for okay, so it's that, but it's also like, who is the most interesting person that you could put in this situation? So for the disasters, I really wanted to take a group of kids who failed out of the academy and then put them in a situation to be the only ones who can stop, the grand evil plot thing that's going on. And I just liked that idea of taking the unlikely heroes and having them be the heroes. Spoilers, I guess. I don't know. I mean, y'all know that.
That's it right there. But I mean, that's it. Exactly. Like, it's not just, yeah, you have to figure out who will move your plot along, because I mean, you could have written a totally different book if you had chosen different characters. It would have been the ones who, well, I can't talk too much about your book, actually.
Everything is spoilery.
But I think that's always interesting, right? Is it which character you actually chose and how that would affect your story? And sometimes I've gotten revise and resubmits from agents before, and I've seen notes from editors that say things like, oh, I loved this, but I just wish it had started here. Or, and those were story decisions that I made, as I was working through things. And so it's interesting, the characters that we identify with. All right, so you create character sheets. What else do you do when you're building a character? Like, we've established why they're important. What are our clear takeaways here? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I have a variety of things that I do to help get to know my characters a little bit. I guess because of the type of stuff that I tend to write. Actually, no, because I even do this with my contemporary stuff too. I tend to have like my one main character, and then I sort of build a cast around them. So usually the first question that I'm asking myself is, who needs to be here? What type, almost like what archetypes do I need? If I'm building a crew for a spaceship, then, I'll start out with like, okay, like I need a gunner, I need a pilot, I need a co-pilot, a navigator, some of those functional roles. With a contemporary, I might be more like, okay, I need a best friend. I need, somebody who, can facilitate things for a character. Like, I need somebody to be there to do something. And so I need to make them, an integral part of not just the plot, but also of that like friend group or something. So I try to identify those places where a certain type of character is needed. And then I just get to play around a lot, especially if I'm doing like sci-fi stuff or fantasy stuff. Then I'll break out my my D&D manuals or my Serenity.
So glad you actually brought those to the episode, as discussed.
I love props. I'm all about props. Yeah, I love to break out like my role-playing manuals and like do up a character sheet, like a Dungeons and Dragons style character sheet for my fantasy heroes and stuff like that. Yeah. But I also do stuff like, I'm not as into like Myers-Briggs or anything like that, but I once went to this like emerging leaders workshop for librarians or something, and they had us do this like true colors personality thing to talk about workplace conflicts and all of that kind of stuff. And so it just talked about how in a team you need all four of these colors, and different people have different strengths and tend to act in different ways and react to change in different ways. And I thought, this is actually really interesting from a writing standpoint, because I have, the orange characters or whatever are going to react to a situation in a very different way than a, green character or whatever. Do you have any like, systems or anything like that you use?
I do sort of, and there's a couple of things that went through my mind as you were talking about that. First of all, I want to say that one of my favorite books of last year was The Female of the Species. And did you read that?
I didn't, no.
It's dark and fabulous. And
yes, because dark.
So there's our main character, who's fierce, and then there's her best friend. And at some point, like 2/3 through the novel, the best friend makes a really, really bad decision. And I think if I remember it correctly, and so they have to intervene. And so when I think about this like best friend character, in order to make that really bad decision believable, like the work to get that character there began the first time we met her, and she was a little bit vulnerable, and she came from this, that, or that kind of background. And here's how she interacted around the main character. And here's, her sloppy choices that would lead her to make this other large, so everything is an accumulation of choices. And I just think about in that book, because because the characters are, I think they're well drawn, and they're also emotionally compelling, and they're recognizable. I think people would probably argue with me on that, but especially spoilers. But this best friend, I think, is great, and I still remember her, and I still remember little details about her, and so that often doesn't happen with best friends, which is why there's like fake Twitter accounts for YA best friend and stuff like that. So I guess, I mean, one thing I do is I'm always thinking about these minor characters being the main character. So in the book I'm working on now, like, I know what kind of car, you know, her interest drives, and it's like his mom's minivan, and here's why that's funny, and you know, and here's how that'll affect later decisions. And so I think you have to, I think about this organically, and I try character sheets, but although I am a list maker in my life, like, I lose character sheets, and then I feel like I'm pinned to the character sheet. And so if I go with a certain type, it's hard for me. I'm a little rigid in my thinking unless I begin organically from the start. You know. But anyways, one thing I want to go back to with that is the choices. And so we've talked to our Pitch Wars mentees for many years about choices, and always thinking about choices when you're making characters or when you're doing anything. And so you, the writer, are making deliberate choices, but your characters need to also like everything they do needs to be construed as a deliberate choice, you know? And so both the main character and then the other characters in scene, I'm thinking about, what do they want? What about them wants this thing? And then how do they go forward? So that's kind of how I do it. Because I tend to come up with main character, plot. I have those placeholder archetype type characters. And then as I need to paint them and fill them in, I really think about choices more so, you know?
No, that makes sense. And that is feedback that we've given a lot to a variety of people. That everything needs to feel, you know, there just has to be an inherent logic in the way your characters are reacting to things. It needs to feel like it necessarily follows from who they are as a person. And I definitely start to get that kind of stuff in mind right from the start. I do tend to write my stuff down. I keep it in a Google Doc so I can always refer back to it, because sometimes as I'm writing, I can start to feel myself drifting. And, you know, I usually make a decision in a moment, in the moment, like, am I drifting in a way that I like? Is this something I want to change? Or do I want to, you know, stick with what I've got already? And in that early, like, character development, I'll usually come up with a very broad character arc. So I have an idea of where I'm shooting, like what I'm shooting for. Like in the disasters, it'll be that, you know, that general idea of starting out as a reject and becoming a hero. That's like the very broad idea of a character arc. And I'll come up with a couple of things that are unique to my story and my world, that really inform who they are. So for my 5 characters in the disasters, it was, why did they attend the academy in the first place? Why did they want to go? And why did they get kicked out? Just those 2 things can tell you a whole lot about a person.
For sure.
And I think every story has those little things. You know, I wrote a book that was about fandom and beauty pageants and stuff like that. And so for each of the characters that were participating in either fandom or beauty pageants or both, I was like, why are they doing this thing? Why is it important to them? What are they getting out of it? Why does it matter to them? Yeah. And those kinds of things drive who they are through the entire book.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice. And even as I'm thinking about the work in progress I'm working on now, like, I can tell you what that question is. I can't exactly tell you all the answers yet, but why are they, you know, working in this certain spot, and what does it mean to them, means to an end? Is it important in and of itself? And yeah, that's how you create compelling characters. You know, you make them want something, because the people in your life who are the most interesting are not the ones who are satisfied and have it all figured out. They're the ones who are still struggling and hustling and trying to figure it out. And
thank goodness.
Right? I mean, because that's right. You know, I don't know if I have any friends like this. Maybe I do. But you call them and they're like, oh yeah, nothing's changed. Everything's good. Yep, it's good. And I'm like, really?
Goals.
Right. And then I call another friend, and oh my God, this thing happened, and we can have a 2-hour conversation about it.
I was that friend 10 minutes ago, by the way.
I am often that friend. You know, and then of course also to make it interesting, there's a lot of people who lie and say everything's fine and it's not, and there's an interesting character trait. But yeah, I think if you think of your characters not as characters but as humans who happen to be on the page in your story, I think that's a useful way to add depth as well, you know, because
And I think one other thing that I, early in my writing tended to neglect, and now I place a lot of emphasis on it, is how my characters interact amongst themselves. I've always spent a lot of time like developing each individual character and who they are as a person. And I would have all of this elaborate stuff worked out, but then I would get feedback like it's the interactions between the characters that are not feeling different enough. Like the way that, Ryan interacts with Z needs to be different than the way Ryan interacts with Case. All of those relationships need to be different. And so what I do now is I make myself a little grid, with one character on one axis and then and then each of the other characters along the other one, and just give a couple of keywords like this relationship is very fiery and antagonistic, or this one tends to be very like shy and awkward in how they interact. And of course, those interactions are going to feel different from the perspective of each character involved in that interaction, but just giving myself those couple of touchstones, I guess, I cannot talk today. I'm sorry. I'm going to go to bed right after this. Yeah, like just having some small idea for each of those pairings, I find personally really helpful. If I come up against a bit of dialogue and I'm like, oh, I just don't know how these characters should be talking in this instance, then I can go back to that. It's just a little tool for myself.
Yeah, I'm totally going to steal that, actually. I think that's a great takeaway, too. Like, I love all your charts and these sorts of things. And a graph like that is a really useful, like, visual way to show, where characters fall. And because we all have people who, we talk to and we're so excited. And then there's the ones that it's like okay, I'm going to get through, and, or you just vibe with someone, or, and I think that our humans on the page, also known as characters, need to do that too, and, yeah, that's a great idea. One thing I think is interesting. So we talked about, one thing I always do is I write scenes before, like, we get to the story point. So, if we have best friends or a love interest, I'm going to at least know one or two scenes, that happened, like, 2 months ago, or the first time they met, or something like that. And your book is interesting because your characters literally meet each other, like, what, I don't know, 5 minutes or 5 pages into the book, or 2 pages into the book. Yeah. And so you don't have the luxury of all of this like backstory and shared context and things like that. So that's that's a different story problem to solve, I guess. But yeah. All right. So I guess we need to move on to recommendations. What do you recommend this week?
Dang, I had something and I forgot. You go.
Well, let's see. I am watching The Get Down, which is very thoughtful and I would highly recommend. And I'm reading just a bunch of books on medieval history for research for a project I'm doing. So I'm sort of in between books and things. Yeah. What about you? Did it come to you?
It kind of did. So I'm sort of skipping between a lot of books right now. I'm like starting one thing and then something else. But I just got an arc in the mail today that I'm really, really excited about. That's going to be my next thing that I dive into. And it's called Ship It by Britta London. It is a fandom oriented book, and it's just delightfully queer and inclusive and all of the things that I love, and I'm super excited to dive into it. So it showed up in my mailbox today, and I did a little dance outside, and I'm sure my neighbors think I'm weirder now. So, that is what it is.
That's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
What are you going to work on during sprints today?
Oh, my work in progress, one that's close to 20,000 words. I may get us up to 18 tonight. So
nice.
Yeah.
I am not going to work on sprints tonight. I am going to go to bed because I have had a terrible day, and Jamie's got your back for sprints today. Yes.
We'll see you on Twitter.
Yes, we will see you on Twitter. Well, Jamie will see you on Twitter. You can follow her at Jamie Pacton and me at Geektastic Lib, but I won't be there tonight. Sorry. And don't forget to subscribe below so you don't miss our next episode, which will be Monday, October 2nd at 9 p.m. Eastern. This has been Tea and Type. Let's go make some words together.
Bye. Bye, guys.